Good morning. Yes, as Claire kindly introduced me, my name is Erin Walsh. I'm Head of City Strategies at Future Cities Catapult. As from this morning, also known as IT. Happy with either. It works for me as well, so thank you. When I spoke with Pete from Playable Cities, and I was asked to speak at this session this morning, these were kind of the words that were discussed: play, planning, policy, placemaking. And one of the key things asked was to talk around policy and the playable city. So after much research and looking at what we've done and my background in planning, the conclusion is there is none. So it's going to be an easy talk, really, on that front. But if I want to go back to what Miguel said about the lens, and I think this is a really important point about how we all approach something and about those lenses, and I want to give you a little bit of lead into the lens that I'm going to approach this talk from. So I'm a planner by training, qualification, working in it for over 10 years, also an urban designer, and this is the tool often we use. Any other planners in the room? One. Brilliant. Okay, I've got your back covered, right? It's just the two of us, just you and I. Okay, so this here, as you would have known, often this is the thing we use, and this is around rule. It's a ruler, it's about measurement, it's about space, and it's exactly that. It's kind of applying it to places. And if it was solely that, we'd make really sad places. So it has to be that and more. But these are some of the tools that we need to start to think about the places that we shape. So I've had the benefit of working at Liverpool City Council in particular. I worked at many other city councils, but I focus in on Liverpool because it was my home for over 10 years. And I had the benefit of seeing streets and places, and those places where we live, the places that we go and we work, and where our children are, and where they play in our schools. And this is any kind of normal terrace street, or for those of you in the audience, you may also recognize it as another place. It's a good news story of what was a very poor planning policy. Okay, so while there's no policy on the playable city, there certainly is policy around planning and around bigger agendas and how we make places. And often it's those policies that have an impact that generate different types of play. So this here actually is this same place. Apologies, maybe I'm too far from this here. Yeah, so this is actually Toxteth. This is the Granby 4 streets. This was the before. This is part of the new Pathfinder area. Any of you that are from the northwest or northeast of the UK will recognise this. It was part of the new Labour government about how do we regenerate our spaces. It was about, unfortunately, taking down a lot of our former terraced houses, streets that worked quite well, and putting it into this state. And then, fortunately, through the work of more creatives and looking at how we could retain them, reuse them, the likes of Assemble, it was bringing those streets back into life. But moving on, I use this project as well as another example of place, and this really struck me as a chord. And again, this is about that lens, and it's that playfulness in a city. And we talk about it, if we think in a built environment perspective, this is the old Yates's Wine Lodge up at Moorfields, and it sat as a redundant building for many years, because to get into this condition, it has to be 15 years plus redundant. But this was a fabulous piece of ingenuity by Richard Wilson, turning the place over, and it ran from 2007 to 2011. And it was just that coming together of art, playfulness, and innovation. And literally this section of the building was cut out and it rotated in a hydraulic action. And it just showed you, it was that sense of turning the place over, and even in the sense of that art installation, it was a play on what was happening to the city. So again, it was that kind of a reflection of where the city was going, on the political and the policy decisions that have been made for it. Another one that struck me, and definitely in living in Liverpool, that I really was quite blown away by. Some of you may have the experience of this in Liverpool or potentially in other cities. This is La Machina. It was the La Princess. A giant spider took over the city for 4 days. Okay? And when I go back to that ruler, never when you put that ruler to a piece of paper could you have imagined that this would have taken over your city for 4 days. But it did. And again, this is not about necessarily the place planning, but it's about all the other people that are part of that see the possibility of what this could be for the city, how this could bring in hundreds of thousands of people and give people a different perspective on the city that they live in. So I think this is just those lenses that you can start to see our places through, and how we can start to kind of get a sense of identity and self. And for Liverpool, the news stories that this carried, and the sense of self-esteem and kind of a sense of community within the city. There was family days planned out around this. There was events planned around the back of this here. So this is just some of those lenses that I come to this discussion on. This here is, so this is kind of before I moved out of Liverpool, I worked at the University of Liverpool, the Creative Exchange Programme, and going from those kind of planning sides and urban design and working with the physical environment, thinking about how innovation can play more of a role. How can we use the new capabilities in what we are currently doing? And one of the projects I worked on was open planning. So if we think about a democratic process, planning is at the root of that. It is about a very democratic process. But the way we do it is still a lamppost still a piece of paper on a lamppost. It's still a letter through your door if you're lucky to be in the red ringed area. It might be a very small piece of information at the bottom of a newspaper. So one of the prototypes that we built was how can we use a more digital interface to enable people to be part of that democratic process. So this was a very small prototype and it was open planning. And this is what opened my eyes to actually what more can we do with innovation and technology in placemaking. And that's what brought me to my current job, and that's Future Cities Catapult. So that's just kind of that journey through it in the lens, and that's very much what we're about. And it goes to what can we do with current and more traditional systems if we use innovation and technology, about enablement. So with that, our mission, advance innovation to grow businesses and essentially to make cities better. And we believe we can do all three of those. And I think there's going to be a lot of overlap. We work with the innovator community within SMEs, and I think there's a lot of commonality between the playful city and some of the challenges we face with SMEs as well. And I want to share those with you. So this here is one of the areas that we work in, advanced urban services. And it goes back to Miguel's point around the complexity of a city. And it's not just a system, and I very much agree with you on that. There's many different systems that operate within a city, but it is not a system itself. One of the ones that we look at is advanced urban services. So everything from water to sewerage to gas, electricity, metro, all those elements that make up a city. And all of those elements, without them, our cities would not operate the way we need them to. So moving this on, coming to today, I looked at play. I know what play is when I worked in planning, and play is very much around this definition. And when we take play and we look at policy, we have the likes of Article 31 from the United Nations, the right to play. We also have the likes of Sport England that give us rules and guidelines around play. But when we then move that forward into the Playable Cities vision, then we start to change that. And for this, that's my point, we don't have a policy for this. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually see it quite a positive thing. And one area I want to focus on is the future city. So it's that kind of going forward. And I think the points that Michele made in his presentation absolutely sing very much to that sense of how do we approach the future city with the complexities that we already have. So one of the key things is around our urban future. And I think this is one point in this context we cannot deny. And I think play has a huge role to play in this. It's our urban future, and population increase, if we believe the statistics, the likes of the United Nations, we know population is going to increase unprecedentedly. So where we are today, we have 3.8 billion people in the world. Moving forward to 2050, 6.3 billion. That's nearly 70% of the entire population living in cities. That's quite, to imagine that, we've never experienced that before. We have a certain amount of resources, we have a certain amount of land, we have a certain amount of space, we have a certain amount of infrastructure and services. How are we going to adapt and develop those and evolve to accommodate this here? Coupled with this, we also have growth in the amount of cities that we have. Again, the United Nations predicts in the next 30 years, we're going to have an additional 150 cities over 3 million people. So they're two big numbers to think about when we think in this context. And this is very much what we look at. So three of the areas that we see from our perspective where we have a lot of challenge is around urban infrastructure. So again, 80% of the cities that currently exist, 80% of all infrastructure already exists into our future. So we've got to be very smart about how we adapt that and evolve that going forward. Another element that is key for us is around healthy cities. If our population keeps on increasing, we've got to ensure that these are healthy places for people. The likes of the UK, one of our key concerns is obesity levels increasing. Also the likes of diabetes. How can we create more healthy cities for citizens? And then thirdly, the other one is around urban mobility. So for example, we know that all car journeys made in London are under 2 miles. That's a very minimal distance, and yet we're using car journeys for that. If we think about cars, they take up 5 square meters of space. If you have a car parked at home, that's 5 square meters. If you park it at work, that's another 5 square meters. You think about that multiplied by the amount of cars, that's a lot of space we're using in our cities for a mode of transport that's less than 2 miles. So how do we get more creative about these challenges? So going into that, this is the point I want to make around play. And we know that play is a key underpinning for creativity and innovation in cities. And this goes back to our work on SMEs, and I want to make this link here, is that we work with the innovator communities. We work with SMEs across planning, around digitization, and one of the challenges we look for them, and I think this is also one of the challenges, and I want to put this as a thought more than anything, one of the challenges we find in a city space of play are around some key market barriers. And this here is around organizational, financial, and business cases, okay? So when we want to make a change in a city, around future cities, whether it should be this or not, the reality is from the research we're doing, these are some of the barriers that we come across. And anybody that ever delivered a project in a city will know you can have a great idea, but if you don't start to hit these key things, it's not going to happen. So it's about enablement as a key point. So just taking these in turn, organizational. When we think about our cities, there is, I don't know a city without a level of city governance. Siloed organizational structures, working on projects previously, your parks department has one budget, your your education department has one budget, your planning department has another budget. So play crosses all of those budgets, but it's very much siloed. So that's a key challenge that we find even in the innovator community from SMEs and advanced urban services. Another one is lack of local level and city level competencies. So often, players, innovators, they're ahead of the game and the skills are not necessarily there to catch up with it. The other is fragmented ownership over physical and digital assets. Again, if you've ever implemented a project in a city, this is one of your key challenges. You go somewhere and you think, okay, it's just this building, but we want to do this here, like turning the place over. Once it goes over the public footpath, it's somebody else's domain. So there's a lot of complexities to making something happen. The other is around financial, available funding, inflexibility of the sector budgets, again, to the organization, difficulty in capturing value, and this is really important because this is about impact. If you can't capture the impact of a project, whether it's social, environmental, or financial, it's very hard to look at scalability of that project. So this is another key finding we have found around innovation in advanced urban services, and I think there must be a commonality across the Playable Cities domain in this. The other is around business case, underdeveloped business models. I'm going to talk to you with a case study in a moment how we're working on that. The other is lack of evidence. So very much about evidence to support business cases. So, you've got to trial it somewhere, you need to find somebody that wants to work with you, and then you can go somewhere else to say, there's nothing easier than saying, actually, we did this in Bristol, Manchester, this is why you could do it. You need those business cases and case studies. So moving on from that, I'm going to focus in just on a couple of case studies. Thanks, Claire. A couple of case studies just to bring these to light and some of the work that we're doing. So this is Civic Accelerator. This is a project, you'll all be familiar with crowdfunding, I take it? The concept of it? Brilliant, okay. Lovely, thank you. Claire likes that, nice shout out, thanks Claire. So this here is Civic Accelerator. So we worked with 2 cities, Manchester and Hull. And essentially this was about so this goes back to the enabling part. So civic crowdfunding is not a new thing. I really like this example. The Statue of Liberty, whilst we know is gifted to the US, the base in which it stands, they did not have the money for the actual podium of the Statue of Liberty. And they put out a call to the citizens of America. And the money came from the citizens of the US that the Statue of Liberty now sits on. So it's not a new concept. But again, it's that sense of how can we bring these mechanisms into a more digital age? How can we scale this? So, civic crowdfunding, Kickstarter, really good example. You have a good idea, you put it online, people bid for it with money, so they say, I like that, and the project either happens if it gets enough money or not. This was about us thinking, all right, if we took that model and applied it to a city perspective, could we be more creative with it? And that's what we did with both of these cities. This was with the city council, this was with a business consortium. So, okay, this is a really good point in case. You all recognize this one. This is an example of civic crowdfunding. This actually happened in Bristol several years back. We took this was done just through public subscription on a web page, But we then worked with SpaceHive and KPMG. So SpaceHive are the developers of this here platform. KPMG, as you know, are an accountant company. And we worked with ourselves, and we partnered with Manchester City Council and Hull Pioneers. And what we did was, Manchester City Council, invariably, when they would have a pot of money for funding, they would go through the usual channels. It'd be public notice boards, it'd be through the paper, it'd be through their neighbourhood officers, and they would have a certain level of impact. Anybody that wanted to apply, you had a 16-page form to fill in. Those forms that would then come in, you're talking hundreds of pieces of paper. It took 3 people within the council office to sift through those papers over several weeks. Okay, so even to get to the process of thinking which is our shortlist, you're already talking quite a long time. Before you even get to the public consultation to say, do you like this idea, you're now adding on an additional 3 weeks if it's a project taking place in the built environment. So there's a time lag there now building of months. This here is how we worked with SpaceHive to say, you already have a platform, you've already demonstrated it works. Could we work with Manchester City Council and look at a more creative business model or financing model where the money that you're putting into the pot doesn't go through that traditional paper-based system, but you do it electronically online. And you, Manchester, you would actually put the money into the pot. So Manchester put £50,000 into the pot and said, let's trial this, and this is exactly what they did. So they too bid for projects that were happening. The benefit of this is it's back to the citizen. The citizens came forward. So they voted for the projects that they wanted. So instead of going to public consultation, if Ancoats was pledged £370,000, you had a good indication that the public were behind it. So this is an example of how technology and innovation can enable citizens to engage with placemaking. A lot of the projects off the back of this here were very much around festivals, around art exhibitions. It was whatever the people of Manchester wanted to come forward with. So that's just one example around that, about business models. This here is how we captured it. It's about kind of best practice, looking at a guidebook for local authorities. Taking that best practice, we sent this to all local authorities in the UK to say, this has been done. This is a guidebook to help you to do it. We looked at the levels of risk. We also looked at the value chain. We also put the business models in there. We gave them the tools to empower them to work with citizens. So that's the big thing here. What can we do about sharing best practice and knowledge as well? This is another one I just wanted to flash up. This is Open Play. This is also an online platform. This here is, you know, there's so many different venues across the likes of the UK play pitches, but there's not one central platform taking these all together where you can access them. This is another example where innovation and technology is bringing them under one roof. So, bringing it together very quickly, some of just the top lines I'd like to leave you with is, okay, whilst there's no policy specifically on this, I think some of the takeaway points, certainly from our lessons, are you can't underestimate the importance of guidance, you know, best practice, share case studies. So of those good practices that you've seen, creating real case studies, sharing the knowledge, making exactly in forums like this, sharing that knowledge together, building relationships with cities and key stakeholders to make it happen. And the other one is capture and record the impact, because that's their key indicators for leveraging funding or opportunities within cities. The last point I want to leave you on, just going back to my roots as a planner, this is a theorist of planning, is Patrick Geddes. And I think this is just a particular nice one about how we see cities. And I think it adds to Miguel's point about the compact cities. Lovely. Thank you very much. Thanks.